Where are we talking to you from?
I'm in Seattle.
And I'm at home in Los Angeles.
And who's who?
I'm Karen.
I'm Allison, the director.
Hi, Karen, and hi, Allison. So this is a wild film. Let's start with a little bit of background. Allison, this is your first feature, but you've done a bunch of other films, right? Shorter films?
Yes, I've done shorter films and shorter documentaries, and I actually met Karen through my last short documentary. She came on as an executive producer for The Love Bugs, which was on POV Shorts.
Oh, great. POV is one of the great public television series, and you should all put it on your DVRs and watch it because they do great films and very unique. And so how did this film come about?
Well, I've done freelance work for the BBC, and at the time, the BBC put out a call for crime stories. And this particular story, I'd read about it months before in the Smithsonian, and so it had always haunted me. And so when the BBC put out that call, I started to dig into the story a bit more in order to pitch it to them. And then I realized that it was a much richer story and that the theft itself is kind of just the tip of the iceberg for this deep dive into this the psychological motivations of this couple.
There, most documentaries try to find the truth in something. They go for a very straight look. They don't go off on a wild and wacky adventure. Is that the way you started? And then at a certain point you said, wow, there's a much more fun story to tell. And can you bring us through your process?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started it, I was thinking of it more, or when I was first researching it, more in the vein of a true crime documentary, traditional, but I always knew there was something quirky about it. But then as I started to read Jerry's stories, and I felt like those were such an insight into his character and how each of the protagonists in his stories were basically avatars of himself and his wife, then I realized that it would be much more intriguing to really weave in those stories and to explore the possibilities of what might have happened. And then, there were some things that we didn't find out until rather late in filming. For instance, the whole issue with the septic tank. And I think Karen could maybe elaborate on the really unique aspects of exploring possibilities without having a definitive resolution.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the very beginning when Allison brought us this story, we thought it was a super intriguing story, but it was a little bit hard to get our head around how we were gonna make an hour-and-a-half film out of it because we didn't have access to Jerry and Rita themselves. We knew that what the good part of it was we had a mystery about where this painting went for 30 years, and then we had a resolution because the painting was found, but we didn't know much about everything in between. There was so much mystery, and they were a very private couple, so we didn't know much about them. It was really hard to kind of figure out who they were, so we just basically started knocking on doors, and every little detail that we got from all the different people that we interviewed, from their family members to their neighbors to, we tried to reach out to their children. That's another story. All the different cast of characters from this small town and from the art world and the museum sort of helped us, just were breadcrumbs along the way. And then once we started interviewing people and we realized that that book existed and we really started reading it, we actually kind of started connecting a lot of the dots that nobody else had connected before, including in our perspective, the FBI even, because we were just kind of going even deeper than we thought anyone else went, trying to figure out this couple and what the story might be. And then once we had that, we started really figuring out that we could have fun with how we were going to tell the story, utilizing those different elements.
Can you talk for a minute about, I always like Q&As to get into the actual art of filmmaking, the process of filmmaking, which I don't think most people understand how complicated and difficult it is to make a film, how many thousands of hours it takes. How many days of shooting did you have? I mean, it looked like you kept going back and forth, and yet I assume you had a very tight budget and you couldn't just spend lots of money. Did you do it all in one shoot, or did you go back a number of times?
No, we didn't do it all in one shoot. It took, let's see, I started establishing rapport with the nephew back in the start of 2019. It was very early that year. And so I did some, we did some initial filming that year. We did a few things. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And so we couldn't do filming for a time. And then we went back and did most of our filming in 2021. And the adaptations of Jerry's stories, we were there for 5 days, I believe it was, down in Arizona, filming that part of the film. But that was done at the very end. Everything else we followed over the course of those 2 years. But again, a lot of it had to be put on hold during COVID. But definitely, it wasn't all done in one shoot, because we were still finding out things, like with the septic tank, for instance. Once we started to find that out, we knew we had to come back for a shoot where we specifically would go to the house with a ground penetrating radar.
Yeah, my point in asking the question is just travel alone can eat up a budget before you know it, and all the times you have to go back.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was really interesting is when we started it, our very first shoot was at the Museum of Art in Arizona, where the painting was stolen from. It was just a couple, it was shortly, not that long after they got the painting back, so they finally had the wrecked painting somewhat on display, but they were super excited they had the painting back, but it was in terrible shape. So we went there for our first shoot. Was a little reception that they had showing the painting to people for the first time since they got it. And then COVID hit, the painting moved on to the Getty for its restoration, which ended up taking a lot longer because of the pandemic, which actually allowed us the time we needed to kind of go back and forth. We probably interviewed about 30 people for the film over a number of times. We went back multiple times to certain people like Ron Roseman and the thrift store guys. We interviewed multiple times. And then by the time and then when our edit started, what we did was we had figured out how we wanted to tell the story as the documentary part of it. And then using the stories in the book, we scripted out what we would need to recreate to kind of weave those layers. So we were editing, and then once the editing ended, it was just such a happy accident and a great coincidence that the painting was done with its restoration after we put the film out at South by Southwest earlier this year. The painting in its earlier glory went on display at the Getty and now has returned in full splendor to the University of Arizona. And we just got lucky with timing that our film kind of followed that whole path, and we were able to kind of include the journey of the painting itself back to its home base, which was really lucky for us.
Yeah, amazing. We have time for a couple of questions. Yes. You were not able to find out how they afforded all the travel. Thank you. That was a question that I had too. And the Remington and the other valuable things that were sold or maybe disappeared.
Well, we didn't ever really have an answer to that. We always wondered, and that was kind of what was driving us as we were investigating and researching and talking to people, was how could this couple of retired school teachers have afforded that? And there was one level to which we never went, which I think if we were the FBI, we would have done like a major forensic accounting research of their bank accounts.
Yeah,
and
you didn't
figured
get
out-
their bank records.
Right. We stopped short of that.
Oh, come on, it's another film.
The nephew had access to a year or 2 years of tax returns, but that was all he was given access to. So I was able to look at those and to see that it appeared that that Jerry might have committed pension fraud. But again, it was not something that we could definitively prove over a series of years because we didn't have access to those additional taxes.
Yeah, and at a certain point, it just became another rabbit hole that ended up nowhere, and we had to be selective about what leads we were going to follow in order to kind of think narratively about how we wanted the structure of the film to go.
Sure. Yes, up there behind the lady that asked.
I know you talked about the son and daughter, said that was another story.
How did their kids respond to the film? Did you try to get them in, to be interviewed? And was there any estate left to help them actually after the wife died?
Yes, so we did talk to the son and daughter. The son is a severe schizophrenic. So I talked with him a few times on the phone, and then we saw him once in person, just very briefly, but we didn't feel like it would be ethical to put him on camera because he was so untethered from reality. Even talking to him on the phone, he couldn't, even on his meds, he wasn't making much sense. And then the daughter, she had some developmental disabilities. And then she also was an addict, and she died recently. But again, we interviewed her, but it was a similar situation where we felt it would have been really unethical to put her on camera too, because she had so many, she had the mentality of maybe a 10th grader, possibly. Yeah. She wasn't all there. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Right here in front, yeah.
Was the University of Arizona rewarded money by the insurance company, and then did it have to be then returned?
Oh, that's a good question. Was there insurance money that went to the university museum, and did it have to get returned if it was paid out? 30 years, you'd think there would be a claim.
Well, that's a really interesting question. Actually, we never asked that. I don't know. That's a very good question. But, I imagine they definitely didn't give it back if they got it. And I imagine that the insurance probably had to pay a lot of the money towards the restoration, which I also don't know for sure the details on that. But yeah, that's an interesting question.
I think, if I recall from reading old newspaper articles, I think they used some of the insurance money to buy security cameras.
Say that again, to buy what?
Security cameras.
Security cameras. So one more question. Did they ever answer the question about what's in the attic?
They didn't. There was nothing in the attic.
There was nothing in the attic. That was too short a question. Yes. To be the last one, I mean. It was a good question. Did he ever think that somebody would make a film about him? I mean, he did that giant book.
In the book?
Yeah.
In the book were there stories about
Well, or at other times, yes.
I think he had the hubris.
The hubris.
That he probably envisioned a film being made about himself, daydreaming about it. And I think with his book, he felt like it would get him some recognition. But I don't know. What do you think, Karen?
Well, he never mentioned a film, but yeah, I definitely think in a way, I think his nephew or Isaac says it best when he said he really got what he kind of wanted. He became famous or infamous, however,
right.
You want to take it. So I think in the end, Jerry might probably be not that mad that there's a film being made about this, and that maybe his book is selling more on Amazon right now. I'm not sure.
Oh, it is. It was. He did actually self-publish it.
Yes.
He did.
Oh my!
It's available on Amazon.
You heard it
Prime.
first. You can run out and get it. Thank you all so much, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for joining.